Do you want that awesome Sasquatch Bronco look, but not the thousands it adds to the price? What if you could get the look yourself on a budget? Today, I'm installing a 2-inch rough country lift with their impressive Vertex coilovers, which have 8 stages of adjustable dampening, letting you easily dial in the ride for street comfort or trail performance. Adding upgraded rough country tie rods, because stock ones are a weak point with bigger, heavier tires, and throwing on true 35-inch Mastertrack RTs. I'll walk you through every simple step, so even if you've never touched your suspension before, you can confidently tackle this yourself. Sure, it's not a full Sasquatch build, no front locker or sway bar disconnect, but with a rear locker, crawler gear, and big tires, I'm confident it can handle 98% of the trails I plan to hit. So does this budget setup actually deliver that aggressive stance and solid off-road performance? Let's find out. Before we get started on any work, we want to get some base measurements. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tape measure, and I'm actually going to be measuring from the bottom of the tire, right in the middle of the wheel, up to where the fender is. And right there, we're looking at about 36. And then back over here, same thing, middle of the wheel, bottom of the tire. We're looking at about 37.5. So we have the Bronco all jacked up. Now, one thing you do want to keep in mind is you want to be able to break your lug nuts on your wheels loose before you get it jacked up. It'll just give you the leverage that you need to go ahead and break them loose. So I should be able to just twist them off by hand, one by one, and set them aside to make sure I don't lose any of them for later. There we go. Whee! Ooh. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go ahead and remove the sway bar in link by removing this nut down here. Now this is a 21mm. So we were using an impact gun. However, the boot on the sway bar in link decided to start twisting on us, and we obviously don't want to cause damage to that. So we decided to switch to a 6mm Allen key on a breaker bar, and ideally, you would have a 21mm wrench. We do not have that, so we have an adjustable wrench instead that we're going to be using. Now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So we just tried to pry out the in-link, and I was honestly the vehicle or damaging the sway bar. So instead, I'm just going to go ahead and unscrew the mount, and I'll be able to take out the whole sway bar without having to pry it up and out. The bolts that's holding in the sway bar is an 18mm, and there is 2 on either side, so 4 in total. 1. That's 2. Once I remove this bolt that's under here, the sway bar is going to come down. So Devin is on the other side, just kind of helping me to keep it stable, because once it starts to lower, we actually have to lift out the sides of the sway bar out of the lower control arm, and then we would be able to put down the full sway bar. Okay.
So much easier.
So much easier. We're now going to go ahead and remove the 2 strut nuts that are on the lower control arm. These are 18mm nuts, so I am using my impact gun with an 18mm. Now, before we do anything though, we're actually going to go grab a Sharpie, and we're going to make a line in the middle of the alignment plate. It's not going to be absolutely perfect, but we do plan to take the Bronco for an alignment after this is all done anyway, so it's going to be good enough to get us to the shop. So before I was looking at it, I was kind of wondering which line to mark. You can see there's actually one in the middle of this plate that is longer than all the rest. So I'm going to mark on that one. So in my left hand, I have a breaker bar with a 21mm socket on it on the actual bolt side. I'm going to be holding that in place, while in my right hand, I'm using an impact gun with a 24mm socket to go ahead and remove the nut. Whew.
That was a quick dodge.
Yeah, you like that? So in my right hand now, I have the 21mm on a breaker bar, and in my left hand, I have the impact gun with the 24mm. And now I'm going to put my head over here so I don't accidentally smack it like I almost did earlier. So we're now going to go ahead and take our jack and we're just going to push this up against that lower control arm. This allows us to have the room so it's not just resting on the bolts that are in there. We can pull the bolts out. You're still good. Bam. So now I'm going to slowly lower the jack to go ahead and remove the extra support that we did, and then we'll be able to pull down the lower control arm. So it took us quite a while to go ahead and drop down the lower control arm because apparently one of the off-roading trips that I did, I managed to somehow crush in this bracket down here, basically making it really hard for this piece to actually go down. So we had to figure out a way to get it out, which we tried lots of different things and it was really difficult, but we got it now. So we're ready to move on. The next thing we're going to be moving on to is we're going to be removing 3 15mm bolts up at the top. Okay.
Nope, did it fall?
It's right in there. Okay.
Got it. Oh. Got it.
Got it. Now let's tackle one of the most talked about weak spots on this generation of Bronco, the factory tie rods. If you're planning on lifting your rig, throwing on bigger tires, or actually using it off-road like it's meant to be, you've probably read the comments or maybe even seen a video or two. The general consensus is that these things, especially the inner tie rods, just aren't strong enough for the added stress of bigger tires or hard off-roading. They tend to bend or snap, particularly when you're rock crawling, bouncing over obstacles, or maybe getting a little aggressive with your front locker engaged. Now, it's worth noting that some of the newer, higher trim Broncos come with slightly beefier tie rods that come with the upgraded steering rack. So for those with more base model Broncos or those equipped with the Haas 2.0, an upgrade like this is going to be significant. So whether Ford meant for them to be a fuse to protect the steering rack is debatable, but bottom line, for peace of mind and trail reliability, an upgrade is a really smart move. That's exactly why I'm swapping my factory ones for a Rough Country HD forged tie rod kit. Rough Country claims these are 57% larger than the stock assembly. They're made from forged steel, which is much stronger than cast. They're bend resistant, and crucially, both the inner and outer joints are greasable for longer life. It replaces the entire stock inner and outer assembly, addressing that known weak inner rod directly. So let's get them installed and let's beef up this Bronco steering. I'm going to be removing this nut right here on the tie rod by using a 21mm socket. This definitely took a couple really hard whacks to the knuckle. After we remove the tie rod from up in the front, we are now going to be removing the boot clamp. I'm trying to release it by putting the flathead underneath the crimped portion of the clamp, and then I'm just hitting it with a hammer, and there it is. We just had to work quite a while on this inner tie rod nut. It is very tight. Now, the recommended tool that they suggested is a big crescent wrench. This one goes up to 2 inches wide. And then when that didn't work right away, we did try a pair of these. What we actually ended up doing, which we kind of jerry-rigged it to be able to maximize strength between Devin and myself, is we put this wrench on the nut, and then I put this breaker bar through this hole right here, and I sat underneath and I pushed on it while Devin pulled, and it just gave us just enough leverage and just enough strength to go ahead and loosen that nut. There we go. So this is our new tie rod right here. Now, this guy is a lot heftier than the original one, which I now understand why this one has so many problems with breaking or bending. This guy is hefty. I don't think it's going anywhere. I'm rotating it to extend it to about the same length as the original ones. We're gonna go ahead, we're gonna take the tie rod and we're gonna install it back on the Bronco. So we had a hard time getting this on too when it was the full piece. I took off this bottom piece just to give me a little bit more leverage to be able to get this seated in there. I was able to get it seated in there. I left the nut where it was when I had it properly measured. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reattach this guy to this. Just tightening up this nut right here. Now I'm going to be greasing this top joint right here. You do have to use a needle attachment because it's a flush mount. So this right here is our new suspension. And what we're gonna be doing right now is I'm just removing the bolts that are already in here to start. It's bolts and washers. The bolts and the washers come pre-installed on the top, but you do need to remove them to be able to install them in the vehicle, and then you install the bolts going from the top down. So Devon's gonna help me come lift this into the proper location because it is quite heavy. Okay, one. Okay, two. Caught it. Okay. Those are all hand tightened in there. I just hand tightened the bolts on the top of the strut. So now what I'm gonna be doing is installing these bolts down at the bottom to secure it to the lower control arm. Yeah, buddy. There we go. The reason I was shaking my lower control arm was to just try to get these screws to go through the holes. They were going into the hole, but getting stuck kind of on the edge. So just by shaking it, it just kind of fell right through to where I needed it to be. Now that I went ahead and hand tightened the nuts that secure the strut to the lower control arm, I'm now going to be using a breaker bar with a 10mm Allen on it. And then I'm gonna be tightening on the bottom the nut using an 18mm socket. So we're about to reinstall my lower control arm. Me and Devon have to kind of work together to try to put it back into the mount, because the way that the mount should be is they should be side by side where you just push it up, easy to go. However, my mount is like this, so we're gonna have to try to push it up and in. So we're gonna give that a go. Little bit. So after a long battle with the lower control arm, we finally got it back up into place. And I will tell you, it was quite difficult because every time we went to go lift up the lower control arm, it would go up, but we couldn't push it into where it needed to be for those bolts to get back into place. What we ended up having to do to make that happen was we ended up having to remove this nut here and raise the upper control arm. We tried with a jack. We tried with jack stands. We tried a few different troubleshooting ways and nothing was working. While we were raising up the lower control arm back into place, we unfortunately got a really small tear in our CV axle boot. So that's just something to keep your eye on. Make sure that you're paying attention to that. If you hear any clunking or anything like that coming from your front end, you might want to check that CV axle. Now that the lower control arm is reinstalled, we are now going to install the mount for our reservoir. That is going to go right up here. There are two 17mm bolts at the top here that attach the actual suspension to your Bronco. That is where we're going to be putting the mount at. So this is what your mount looks like. You are going to put these under the two 17mm bolts up there. Now I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up. Now we get to go ahead and put on the hose clamps that are going to be holding our reservoir into place. Now the way this works is it does have a screw or like a nut right here. We're going to go ahead and loosen it until the other side falls out. Just like that. From here, I'm going to take this up to the top here and I am going to thread this behind and through that bottom opening, just like that. Okay, now that these are up there, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna take my reservoir, I'm gonna stick it in there. But really quickly, in our fight against the front lower control arm, we had some damage done to our reservoir. This is all, it's aesthetic damage. It's not gonna damage the way the reservoir works. I also plan on taking this off-roading anyways, so I do know that this is gonna get beat up, but just to let you guys know, be careful with your reservoirs. Okay, so now starting on this side, I have the other end sitting in there, and I'm just gonna go ahead and twist it to the right, and you should feel it start to catch. Now that I have this side tight enough to hold it in, I'm gonna go ahead and start tightening this side. And these hoses are adjustable as needed. So I'm gonna go ahead, turn this the best that I can. And now that I adjusted the hose, you can see it sits nice and out of the way of everything else. So we're gonna go ahead, torque down this side, and then we're gonna head to the other side. Don't forget to reinstall your sway bar. You do that with an 18mm socket.
Moving on to the rear of the Bronco, we need to remove the bolt and nut at the lower end of the strut. This is where the strut attaches to the rear axle mount. You'll need a 27mm socket and a 30mm wrench. In our case, another socket to remove this bolt. We actually had to go get another impact gun in order to break this bolt free. I found it helpful to use my lightweight impact to bring the bolt all the way out. Be prepared that the axle might move on you, depending on how you have it supported. Next, we have to get to the nuts at the top of the strut, near the frame. Remove the 2 clips at the back of the inner fender liner using a screwdriver. Now I have access to remove the 3 nuts holding the top of the shock to the frame mount. Now with the nuts removed, I can slide the old shock downwards and remove it from the Bronco.
So now that we have removed the old shock, it's now time to put in the new one. So Devin's gonna be helping me to lift it so I can work on getting the bolts at the top hand tightened. Okay, I think that one's on there. So we had to switch to the low profile head on the jack to go ahead and get this axle as low as possible. I just got it. So we have the bolt in place. We put the nut on just hand tight just to secure it. But before we lift the axle back up, we're actually going to go ahead and tighten the bolt quite a bit. So we're going to be tightening up the bolts up here now that we have the axle raised, which is compressing this a little bit, allowing us to tighten these. Now these bolts up here are different size than factory. The factory nuts that we took out earlier, they are a 15mm. We are tightening the bolt side of this, and these are 17mm. So I'm going to go ahead and use a 17mm ratcheting wrench right here. I'm just going to get it as tight as I can, and then we will go back and torque it later. Because I knew that the 2 back bolts were going to be hard to get to, I did hand tighten those a little bit more than the front bolt, just as low as I can go. That way I didn't have to worry about spending a lot of time back there. Hopefully I can just tighten it and move on. Ah, yes. So we're almost done with this rear end over here. Now we did go ahead and torque the bolts on the top. So now the next thing we're going to be doing is we are going to be installing the mount for the actual reservoir. So the first step is you find this piece of your mount, and they come with these little black clips right here. And what I need to do is I need to go ahead and slide these onto the mount. So I did struggle to get these clips on. One of them even kind of opened up on me, so it will be held in place by the actual bolt once we get it in there. So now what I have to do is I have to go ahead, take this, and it needs to go up and underneath the body and the lining. So we did get the mount up here installed. So now what I'm going to be doing is attaching the reservoir using these hose clamps right here. And now we're going to go ahead and repeat that whole process again on the other side. And once we finish that, we're going to torque everything down. Now, rough country does have different specs than Ford in terms of how tight you should torque these bolts. We're gonna go with the actual suspension company's suggestion, and that is what we suggest you do as well. Before we go and get the new 35-inch tires put on, we do have the Bronco down on the ground, so now it's time to get some measurements. So I'm gonna go ahead, take my tape measure. I'm gonna measure from the ground in the middle of the tire and wheel, and the front sits at about 41 1/4. Now we're gonna go ahead and do the measurement on the rear. Now we sit at about 40. The Vertex shocks are installed and they definitely handle off-road better than stock. In the softest setting, they soak up the rough stuff without beating me up. The adjustability is actually useful too. I could tweak it mid-trail if I want a firmer or softer ride depending on my needs. On the highway, they're also surprisingly comfortable. It feels like a lifted SUV, but just as planted as stock. To go with the new 2-inch rough country lift on my Bronco, I threw on a set of 35 by 12.5 R17s. I'm running the Mastertrack Badland RTs. They're about $200 each, so if you want something tough without blowing the budget, they're definitely worth a look. And yeah, they fit on the stock black diamond wheels, but it's definitely tight. I kept the crash bars on at first, and they weren't rubbing on the pavement, but I ended up pulling them off as a precaution for off-roading. Being an RT, you get a solid off-road grip without all the noise and harshness you'd expect from a full-on mud terrain tire. And hey, with a name like Badlands, they feel right at home on the Bronco, even if mine's actually a black diamond. Now, since this was my first time installing a suspension lift, I ran into a few things that I want to share, especially if you're thinking about doing this yourself. I'm no mechanic, so there was definitely a learning curve. Right after the first start, I got an advanced track warning. Kind of freaked me out at first, but I think it was just a calibration issue from the new suspension angles. It actually reset itself and went away on its own. No problems. And if you're wondering about the speedometer, yes, I will need to calibrate it. We did try using ForeScan to make the change, but ran into some issues with the collision avoidance sensor getting tripped. So maybe we'll do a follow-up video on that. Out of the whole install, the biggest bummer was the CV axle. The lower control arm mount on one side was tweaked, so lining it up took way more wrestling than the other side. And that's what tore the CV boot, not the lift itself. It immediately started leaking grease, and when I drove it, I could hear grinding, so we did end up installing a new Ford factory CV axle. Despite that, I'm super happy with how it turned out. It was a learning experience, but that's half the fun, right? This 2-inch rough country lift and 35s have me ready for anything. Call it a fake Squatch if you want. I call it capable enough for me. People always say you get what you pay for, but in this case, I really think you're getting a great value with this setup.
And to give you an idea of the cost, this setup would run you about $2,200 for the suspension, tires, and upgraded tie rods. While Rough Country no longer sells this exact 2-inch lift with Vertex shocks, they do offer other affordable options.
If you're thinking about lifting your Bronco yourself, hopefully this gave you a real idea of what to expect. I appreciate you following along. If you want to see how the suspension and these tires hold up, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see all the mods I've done to my Bronco, check out my Bronco mods playlist. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye, guys.